And joining me now from Hong Kong is the former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr, and from Melbourne is the former Victorian Premier Steve Bracks. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Lee.
Pleasure to be with you.
The Treasury Secretary Ken Henry recently said that population growth would challenge Australia like nothing since Federation. Bob Carr, is it of that order?
I believe it is, but appreciate where I'm coming from. I think the explosion in human numbers is wrecking the planet. That's my starting point. The world population has doubled since 1970. We've gone from 3.5 to 6.5 billion people crowded onto this planet. And we're going to reach 9 billion by the middle of this century. And I think Australians have got an opportunity to say we're going to protect our great natural systems and protect a decent life. And we're not going to do that by force-feeding population growth onto this tired old continent of ours.
Steve Bracks, that point that Mr Carr raises, that the explosion in human numbers is wrecking the planet. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think we can afford to be isolationist on this, Lee. I understand Bob's point, but the reality is that a challenge is an opportunity as well. And if you think of the challenge that we had post the Second World War, where we had a population of around 8 million in Australia, and there was a great political consensus that we needed to increase our population to somewhere around 20 million, and we have. Well, I think we need the same consensus again. We can't close our borders. We can't say to the rest of the world, whatever happens there is not going to happen in Australia. We will have population increase. Our responsibility as legislators, our responsibility in business and industry and as a community is to make sure we provide for that increasing population, and there will be opportunities there. Greater density will mean that certain public options become viable. Better public transport becomes viable. We have to look for sources of renewable water and water which is augmenting the rainfall water as well. So there's all sorts of ways that we can deal with this. But closing our minds and our hearts to people from around the world is not the way that's going to do that.
Well, Bob Carr, Steve Bracks says there's all sorts of ways we can deal with it. Are you optimistic that good planning could help address some of these challenges?
Well, the first point I'd make in response to Steve's comment is that there's no argument that we're going to have population growth. There's no argument that we're going to have a strong, robust immigration policy. It is the rate of immigration that is now the issue that faces us. We were headed for a population of 28.5 billion by 2050. We now know that because of a very significant ramping up of the immigration intake, really a doubling of the intake over the last 5 years, that we're looking at a population of 35 million by 42.5 million by 2055. And I'm very worried about that. I don't think we've got the carrying capacity. I think our cities can cope. I think there are robust plans in place in Sydney and Melbourne. Higher densities and urban sprawl will be part of it, though. That's unavoidable. And I think Australians ought to begin appreciating that the argument over the quality of our urban life begins with the rate of population increase, the rate of immigration.
Well, Steve Bracks, in terms of the way that we deal with it, do we keep expanding the boundaries of Sydney and Melbourne? Do we increase density inside existing boundaries? What is a Sydney or Melbourne in 50 years going to look like?
Oh, look, there's no doubt that we have to pursue better density in our cities. We have some of the biggest sprawls in our cities, in our capital cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, even Perth to some extent, of any cities in the world. And, you know, we need to look at infill development around transport hubs where we have underutilisation of infrastructure. We can take more density in more areas. And you look at some of the new housing choices that people are making, they're voting with their feet and they're looking at coming into some of the urban areas, into the cities, in higher density living, with better public provision outside that. Look, I think we can do much more, but I think it's going to be good for Australia to increase our population. And I think migration is a key part of that. It will assist in our diversity and our openness to the rest of the world, and that's been proven since the post the Second World War period. Secondly, it'll make things viable. I'll give you an example. You know, we've long had a holy grail of saying that we need better competition in one of the busiest air routes in the world between Melbourne and Sydney. One of the best competitions we could have would be to have fast rail. It's just not economic now, but think of a greater population between the two cities. It will become economic. Urban transport in those cities will become more economic and have a better payback as we have greater density as well. We need to see these challenges as opportunities. We can't say to people, other countries, you can take migrants and we won't. Now, of course, Bob's right, and we agree on this. There will be population increase. I would say we should increase it more than he's indicating, because it's good for our economy, growth and demand underneath our economy in goods and services, and that's proved to be the case between some of the states who've pursued that, and better for our society more broadly, and making us more open and engaged with the rest of the world. This is a good thing.
The issue is not population growth. It's not a generous immigration policy. The issue is the rate of population growth. We had a net intake a few years ago of 160,000. Now we've got something like 500,000 people arriving here. That includes short stay people, very often becoming long stay. That's been a very significant ramping up, and it's happened without any environmental impact statement. You've got to have an environmental impact statement for every activity under state and federal planning law that has a significant impact on the environment. But the most significant factor shaping what happens to the Australian environment is the rate of immigration. And no EIS has been required, and no public discussion has taken place about effectively a doubling of the intake. And this happens without any reference to the reliability of Australia's rainfall patterns. I have no idea what the people settling on these ambitious targets are basing their targets on when it comes to rainfall data. The rainfall data I'm aware of is very fragile. And every state in Australia, mainland state, since 2006, has had to resort to desalination because of the pressure on rain sources of drinking water. And this is anyone who's making assumptions about rainfall reliability over the next 20 or 30 years in Australia is on a fool's mission.
On this point of the environmental impact, Mr Carr, in a recent speech, the Finance Minister, Lindsay Tanner, said that the primary source of stress on our urban and natural environments is bad management, not population growth. Would you disagree with that?
I strongly disagree with it. Steve and I have been involved, and our successors have been involved with that awesomely difficult question of managing the Murray-Darling Basin. And no one can say there's a single profound solution that fixes it up for all time. There are a range of highly contested solutions. I think Sydney and Melbourne, as I said earlier, have got very good metropolitan plans. Higher density is part of them. But the fact is, all of your problems are multiplied when you ramp up the increase, when you turn that lever and double the annual intake. And I'd really like federal ministers to stand side by side with state planning ministers when they've got to fight battles to lift residential densities in rail corridors, as has been happening in Melbourne and Sydney, or to release new land on the urban fringe for housing. All these challenges are escalated once you significantly increase the intake, and it's the rate of increase we're talking about, not the fact that there will be an increase.
Well, Steve Bracks, on this point that Mr Carr raises about the coordination between state and federal governments, is there an issue with that when the federal government, say, announces a policy such as the baby bonus, and then it's the state government that is largely responsible for dealing with the additional people that might generate?
I think Lindsay Tanner's right, and you made the point that bad management has been a feature of some of our future planning, and I think that's probably right. I think